Parents of Reddit, what was your worst parenting mistake? Put my son, who was about 8 months old at the time, onto our changing table that is about waist high and turned around to grab more diapers. Terrible decision. Caught him rolling off the table out of the corner of my eye, but it was too late. He fell 3 feet, landed directly on his face and did a full scorpion. He's never cried so hard in his life before or after. I held him and just started crying because I felt so guilty hurting him like that. You didn't hurt him. It was an accident that could happen to any one of us. 3-year-old woke up in the middle of the night and came to tell me she had a bad dream. I walked her back to her room and talked to her about her dream. She said she was dreaming there were bugs crawling on the walls and in her bed. I told her that it was just a dream and the bugs only existed in her head. She didn't get back to sleep for a long time after being told she had bugs in her head. I am a pediatrician and always joke about looking for things in kids' ears when examining them. Dinosaurs, potatoes, etc. One time when I was early in training I said bugs. Never again. That poor kid was super freaked out that there were bugs in her ear. After my daughter spent all her own money on a skateboard, I relayed to her that I was afraid that one of the times she fell off her board she'd get hit by a car. In less than 2 days she didn't try anymore. I don't know if she had a scare or just didn't want me to worry, but I feel like I took one of the most physical hobbies she could have had away from her by projecting my own fear. She doesn't gravitate toward physical activity much now as a young adult. Neither of my parents have Reddit, but they have told me this has been their biggest mistake with me of all time. I was a kid about 14 and I was riding my bike in the front yard. Anyway, I end up falling over onto the ground on my bike while standing up and not moving. Long story short, it feels like I've just been drop kicked in my balls. So I head inside and lay on the couch in pain for a while. Asked my parents to take me to the hospital and they refused. Told me I was just being a baby and that the pain would go away. About an hour and a half later and minutes they finally agreed to take me in. Turns out I had given myself a testicular torsion and the lack of blood to that area of my body meant I was going into emergency surgery. I lost a testicle the same day less than 10 minutes later. Never forgave them for it. Well, we're only at age 1.5 so we haven't had any major ones yet. But teaching my toddler how to throw out her own trash has proven disastrous for the things in our house that aren't garbage but make their way into the trash anyway. Most recently, her favorite stuffed puppy who was missing for a good chunk of time. When I was a child I really liked to catch and bring home animals from the woods. Once I lost a toad in the car. He was never found and I can only imagine that there was a little toad mummy in a hole somewhere in my mom's old minivan for years until we sold it. My worst parenting mistake involved a trip to the air. It was about 8 years ago in December. It was my wife's birthday, but we weren't going anywhere because a huge snowstorm had hit our area. No problem, though. I would do all the shoveling. Can't have her shoveling on her birthday. My son, then about 7 or 8, came out with me to help shovel. We're doing a good job and clearing off the snow when it happened. As I was bringing my shovel up, my son bent down to pick up more snow. I hit his head with the corner of my shovel. The very sharp corner. He shrieked and held his eye. I suddenly worried that I put my son's eye out. Well, I didn't. But I did get him right above his eyebrow and he was bleeding a lot. His coat was getting covered in blood. We went in and couldn't stop the bleeding well so I put my son in the car. Stopped by my in-laws' house, less than a mile away, to pick up my mother-in-law. My wife stayed home with our younger son who was a toddler then, and drove to the ER in the blizzard. They were great and glued my son's wound shut, a special glue that they can use instead of stitches. He was fine, but I felt like the worst dad in the world. His coat was a lot and I ruined my wife's birthday. Plus, to this day, you can see an indentation where I hit my son in the head with a shovel. My dad once accidentally spilled boiling water down my leg which required a trip to the ER. Happened about 20 years ago and I recently found out he still considers it one of the worst days of his life. My son is a freshman in college and I thought I covered all my bases, but I realized during Thanksgiving that I never taught him how to shave. I probably forgot because I have a beard so I don't really shave all that often. But he definitely is not ready to sport one as well. When he walked in the door, my wife asked me why our son looked like Ted Cruz. Don't feel bad. I'm a few years older than your son and my dad never taught me how to shave. It's pretty easy to figure out. Plus if he's really stumped he could just look it up on YouTube. My mom never let me go out with my friends because she was afraid of me getting abducted. So when the time came that I didn't have to ask her anymore, I was too scared to go out. Same bro. Even when I was a teenager she was scared shitless of everything. Half of the time I was scared to ask because I didn't want to watch her have a panic attack over the satanic reptilians that were supposedly around every corner. Not locking up pills. My daughter was maybe 2 on a camping trip. We had one of those MF pill holders with some anti-anxiety medicine in it. She got into it while we were unloading the minivan. We noticed some of the pills were missing. We're almost to the and we noticed them laying on the floor bed. Kids will find anything unless a parent asks them. Not me, but when I was younger, like 6 or 7, I ate some watermelon seeds then got super paranoid that they would rip up my insides. My dad sat me down and told me that my intestines were as strong as this trash bag here. Then he proceeded to test the strength of the trash bag and ripped right through it. I cried for, reportedly, 2 hours. Oh man. One time my wife and I took our son on a trip to the harbor since he was now old enough to go with us on these trips. After a fun-filled day we were driving back home and my wife glanced in the backseat and goes, "Where's our son?" I guess we were not used to having a third person with us when we went out, so that's the story of how we almost forgot our child. That's the story of how we almost forgot our child. I think you and I have different definitions of almost. Not parent, but when I was 7 my parents told me I killed my grandpa. Here's how the story goes. My mom and dad are super superstitious and they have this thing against white. In my culture white is used in funerals, so living people are not allowed to wear white on their heads, hats, bows, hairbands etc. Anyway, so one day I was playing with white thread and it got stuck in my hair. As soon as my mom saw, she ripped it out and yelled at me. Within a week of this incident my grandpa, who was on the other side of the earth, died by slipping on something and hitting his head. My parents said that because I was playing with white thread on my head, that's what caused my grandpa to die. As a 7-year-old I lived with the guilt of murder for 10 years. That's horrible, to blame a kid for something both ridiculous and out of the kid's control. I love listening to music in the car and some of the music obviously features some naughty or dubious words. When I had my young son in the car I would always skip certain songs, but occasionally one slipped through the net. Cue Sex on Fire by Kings of Leon. He got home one day and parroted parts of the song and I was desperately trying to distract him so he would forget it, but he didn't. I had the bright idea of trying to get him to change the word to something else. He was still in the early speaking stage so everything sounded slightly garbled. Anyway, I had success with the word shed. For about a day or so he then just wandered around singing about how his shed was on fire. Then he forgot and moved on to something else and my mortal fear of him saying it at childcare subsided. I have not played that song in my car since and it has been many years. We never censored too much when our kids were little. My son's first favorite song was Smack My B Up by Prodigy at 3 years old. When he started school we explained to him that some songs are just for singing in the car. The other day some lady cut me off and then stopped in the middle of the lane to turn left despite there being a turn lane. I yelled, "You fricking butthole." Then I hear this tiny voice come from the back of my car, "What's a fricking butthole?" And that was the day I taught my 2.5-year-old the word fricking and the word butthole. Thinking that 5-year-olds don't put weird crap in their mouth anymore. Mine tried to eat the lens from a baby monitor camera. He bit it, and it shattered. I couldn't find all the pieces and he wasn't sure if he swallowed any. That was a funner trip. He's fine and didn't swallow any. Not getting my son evaluated for his speech earlier. Now he's in disabled preschool getting speech twice a week and OT because he is kinda clumsy. My oldest is about to be 5 years old, so I still have time for major mistakes, but right now would be accidentally making my son dependent on me or my wife wiping his butt after a poo. He will do it himself at school, but apparently at home it has to be someone else. This has led to some fun standoffs of us yelling that he can sit there until he wipes his butt. "I would never poop at school" was my kid's argument when I tried telling him he needed to wipe his own butt because what if he poop at school? Expecting my first to be potty trained way earlier and way easier than she actually was, it turned me into an unrecognizable monster. To be completely honest, not the kind of parent I strive to be. It was a complete, months-long disaster. Now potty training my second, and it helps so much that I've waited until she was almost 3. My dad has a few answers. When they had my older brother, he was a tiny baby and was lying on my parents' bed. My dad got on the bed, and the baby went flying off the bed and landed on the floor. They claimed that's the only time they dropped any of us on our head, or in general. The other answer was having twins. I am one of those twins. I might agree with having twins. I have them. Don't know who thought 2 at a time was a good idea. The first time we took our son out, we went to a place called Mothercare, which is a store for baby clothes and toys, and this particular place had a large display area filled with various prams and push chairs. We parked our newborn in his crappy hand-me-down pram nearby because he couldn't fit among the sea of display models, and gleefully found the Pushmaster 5000 or whatever it was that we had our eye on, and then went through the process of buying it and organizing when would be a good time to pick up our purchase at a later date. We then left the shop and we were 10 minutes up the road before we remembered we had a baby and that we left him behind. I used to work at Mothercare. This was not an uncommon experience, don't worry. Choosing my first wife to be the mother of my oldest child. She was beautiful and interesting, but she had severe mental health problems that she flat out refused to treat in any way except for large amounts of alcohol and copious piles of Xanax. I tried for a few years to make things work, but after coming home to find that she'd sent the nanny home, gotten trashed and passed out on the kitchen floor while my 2-year-old was totally unsupervised, we packed up and left. She hasn't even bothered staying in touch and is still exactly the same 16 years later. I wish I'd chosen a more stable, mentally sound person to marry and have a child with. It's caused my daughter a lot of anxiety and worry. You did the right thing. Hopefully things will get better for your daughter when she gets older, but also I hope your life was much better in the years after leaving. Woo boy, when my first son was a few months old, I took him out to the woods to get some air and see how he reacts to the birds and trees and dirt and stuff. Soon I had a curious idea, because I know babies have really great grip strength. I put him up to a low, thin branch, so if he fell he wouldn't fall too far, and put his hands against the branch. Sure enough, he latched on. Then I slowly let go and admired my creation. A baby on a branch. Magnificent. Then I wondered if he'd be able to do a pull-up. I said, do a pull-up. He didn't. Probably because he was only 4 months old and couldn't understand English very well. Then I picked him up again and pulled his hands off the branch. I let him play in the dirt for a while and then we went home. About a year later, when he started talking, I started giving him cookies whenever he would say daddy. I think that triggered some sort of Pavlovian response, because now he won't shut up. I have 2 kids. One is almost 2, and the other was born at the start of February. A few days ago I put the older child in bed while my fiancée put the new baby to sleep. She then went to take a shower while I was watching TV, mostly screwing around online with the TV making noise in 5e background. A few minutes later I heard a baby crying, and assumed it was the TV, then noticed a baby crying didn't fit with what was happening on TV. As I was wondering where the sound was coming from, I noticed it was too young sounding to be our 2-year-old. So I thought maybe the TV was on in another room, and ignored it for a couple more minutes. Then I finally remembered that we have 2 kids now. For a few minutes I completely forgot one of my children existed. Sleep deprivation at its finest. My kids are still growing, so I'm not sure how I have emotionally scarred them yet. Physically, my worst parenting fail was falling asleep with my oldest when she was about a month old. I didn't roll on top of her, but I rolled her off the bed. On the plus side, I was poor, so the bed was just a box spring and a mattress, so not a long fall. On the downside, my flooring was just vinyl tile on concrete. I felt so horrible and cried for hours afterwards. She was fine in the end, but I definitely learned my lesson. Nobody drops kids harder than they drop themselves. Not standing up to my abusive husband when he refused to refill our daughter's seizure meds because she wasn't having seizures, so when she went into a seizure because of no meds I was the one the doctor chewed out. I still hate myself for not standing up to him. I had no car, no phone, no money. He controlled everything and I was so intimidated by him. With the doctors to back me up, he realized he was wrong in his thinking. My kids never ever went without their meds again. She outgrew the seizures. I divorced his stupid butt 20 years ago. Best move ever. Well, about 12 hours after she was born, I almost let her roll off my lap onto the hospital room floor. Luckily, I caught her by her face. Then about a year later, I was carrying her into our living room, and I straight dropped her onto the floor. In fairness, this happened because she suddenly wedged her feet against my chest and levered herself straight out, but still. More recently, like 2 days ago, she asked my wife and I what sarcastic means, and we told her. That's turned out about how you'd expect. Letting your 2-year-old try beer, vacationing in Door County, definitely from Wisconsin. I left my 16-month alone with my newborn for like 5 minutes. She covered her in crap. Head to toe crap. I'm pretty sure my 3-year-old would murder my newborn if I left him alone with him. The other day he started playing with him by building a pillow fort for the newborn. Listening to my kid's teacher's principals who told me he had no developmental disorder when I knew something was up. He was 16 before he was diagnosed dyslexic, autistic and at it. I want to cry and scream over the amount of time his life could have been made easier if I had only listened to my gut instinct and not everyone else. Trusted my 18-year-old brother to watch my son. He made my son go on the top bunk of his bed so he wouldn't have to deal with him while he played a video game. My son looked over the edge and got clipped by the fan right above his eyebrow. He has a big scar now. I hope it's at least a bad butt scar. My then 8-year-old son asked me if Santa was real, looked me in the eyes and said he wanted the truth and wanted me to swear to him that I was telling him the truth. So I decided he was old enough and that I should come clean with him. He started crying big crocodile tears and was absolutely devastated. Told me after the fact that some other kids in his class were saying Santa isn't real, so he wanted to make sure he was before he argued with them. This was 3 years ago, and he told me this past Christmas that it was the saddest he's ever been and I better lie to his little sister when she asks. Lesson learned. Letting my kids spend too much time away with family. I essentially can't other raise my kids for like a year. Biggest mistake. Working too much. I missed my son's toddler years working 60+ hours a week. Not telling my 12-year-old clearly that you get your period every month. She had her first period in the same week as me. We ended up stopping by at Walmart for some pads, tampons, and she asks me, I thought you had your period when you were 12. Yes honey, and every single month since then. Well, the looks on her face I will never forget, and it took her days to process the fact that you don't just get your period once in your life. Not me, but not mom used to yell at people who didn't go when the light turned green. What are you, colorblind? Fast forward to my 2-year-old Caucasian nephew yelling at people out the car window, what are you, colored? Not a parent, but I have a story on behalf of my parents involving me. When I was about 6, I went to a birthday party of one of the girls I went to school with. Anyways, during this party we were jumping on the trampoline they had in her backyard. Someone got the great idea to jump off of the trampoline and see who could land on their feet. So cue about 6-year-olds repeatedly jumping from the trampoline to the ground. Surprisingly, nothing happened that day and we all went home happy. The next day I couldn't walk. Every time I tried and intense pain shot through my ankles. Being 6, I solved this by crawling around instead of walking. As a part of my family was visiting from far away, my parents dismissed my complaints thinking I just wanted attention and told me to smarten up. I couldn't stand, so I couldn't listen to them, so I continued to crawl around. Eventually my mom got so frustrated with me she tried to scare me into behaving myself by saying, if you don't stop that you'll have to go to the doctor. When I said that I wanted to go to see the doctor, my mom still thought I wanted attention but took me to see the doctor. When I got in to see the doctor, he determined that I sprained both of my ankles. I like to bring this story up whenever my parents accuse me of lying and rub it in their faces a little. I'm lucky to say that I haven't had any major ones yet, but I used to have reoccurring ones. First kid, you're packing that diaper bag full. Even if it was down the street to the grocery store, I'd pack that thing up as if there was a high probability we'd be marooned for a day or so. Second kid comes around, and I'd forget the diaper bag. Constantly. So many times I'm just buying diapers and snacks while out because that diaper bag stayed behind. It wasn't necessarily junk food, but it certainly wasn't the healthy organic brain booster food that I thought was the only thing our first child should have. Funny how high that overprotectiveness can be when you're on child number 1. Same thing happens with photography. I'm the oldest and there is probably a photo of every hour of my life for years and years. My dad has a tripod and a fancy camera, and every moment is faithfully documented. By the time my second sister came along, she was lucky to be in a few holiday group shots. I don't have too many that I can think of, but one really stands out as the dumbest thing I could have ever done, and I really beat myself up over it. When my daughter was 12, I had a little backhoe I used to do work around my home and property. We had 8 acres and we had 4 acres of manicured pasture with fencing, and I let her drive my backhoe around that area. I often think about how many people die on them that don't know what they are doing, and learned a lot more about accidents on them but only after the fact. Felt really stupid. 12 is old enough to handle a backhoe with supervision. Farm kids are plowing by 8 or 10. Every kid's is different, but if you felt you could trust her, you were probably right. Some kids shouldn't be driving anything at 25, and some are responsible enough at 12. My 2.5-year-old at the time son was a hard child, and one night I was trying to bring him upstairs by holding onto his one arm. He decided to play dead and dropped down onto the floor just before the first step, and then he let out a huge scream. I couldn't calm him down, so I had my neighbor come over and babysit my other 4 kids, including my 6-month-old twins, while I brought him to the ER. Turns out he popped his elbow out of place but at some point put it back in before the hospital. The ER said it happens a lot and not to worry. Well, wouldn't you know it, his favorite story to tell people is about the time my mommy broke my arm and the neighbors had to the my babies. He even brought up the story tonight, and now he is 4.5. No matter how many times I tell him I didn't break his arm, he is absolutely convinced I did. Great mom moment there. When my daughter was 6 months old, I was trying to calm her in the middle of the night. She shoved away from me at just the wrong moment and launched herself off the bed. I tried to catch her by the foot but just tipped her heel, which sent her cartwheeling through the air. She fell on the concrete floor from atop our king-sized pillow top that was sitting on a box spring on top of a custom bed frame. This bee was high up. I felt like the worst mother in existence. I checked her for a concussion and monitored her for signs for 2 hours. She is now an ordinary 4-year-old. This happened to me 2 days ago with my 11-month-old. I can't stop replaying it in my head and I feel like a failure. Hopefully the images will go away soon. So, my immediate family celebrates Christmas, but in a completely secular way. We don't do baby Jesus or Santa Claus, and have expressed to the kids it's just a time to be generous with one another. My youngest started kindergarten and started asking if Santa Claus was real, since a number of their friends believed in Santa. I explained to her that no, Santa wasn't real, but was a myth based on a saint, Nicholas, who had been a real person, at which point my kid asked me if we could visit Saint Nick, and I explained that we couldn't because he has died hundreds of years ago. The next day I got a very upset call from their kindergarten teacher because my kid was running around telling their classmates that Santa Claus was dead. I was bullied in school, so I have made sure my kids can defend themselves, and are in fact rather capable in it. Well, when my daughter was in the 6th grade, the gym teacher had a brilliant idea of having kids learn how to dance. And I mean pair dancing. Boys being idiots, my daughter's dance partner thought it a good idea to squeeze my daughter's bum. And I had trained her that if someone touches inappropriately, she can do what she can to defend herself. So there she is in the gym class beating up this idiot boy in front of everyone. Good thing Finns are more forgiving about use of force than people in US. But the discussions with school staff were not fun. Teaching your kids self-defense is good parenting. Not teaching your kids that inappropriate touching is not okay is bad parenting. And that boy probably learned a valuable lesson that day. You didn't make the mistake, the boy's parents did. My niece came over to swim. 3. I told her to jump in the shower to rinse off the chlorine. She took it literally, jumped inside the shower, slipped, and cracked her head. Words man. Words. Capital P. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.